Have you ever wondered why DEI consultants or firms are the best partners for HR departments or recruiters? DEI is not the responsibility of one department or one person, but it does require leadership and advocates. Whether that leadership and advocacy comes from the DEI or the Human Resource Department, there has always been a close relationship between DEI and HR companies. Almost all HR duties relate in some form or fashion to DEI. So, DEI companies are the best partner for HR departments. You might also be wondering what this has to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion. This illustrates what is essential and top of mind for all HR professionals. We are excited to have you here with us today. This conversation is going to be on fire. I'm looking forward to all of you meeting my guest today. We value your feedback and opinions. Please drop them in the chat. We intend to respond to as many comments and questions from our audience. This takes a great deal of effort to pull off, so I am eternally grateful to all of my loyal guests. Every week, we create new content and always looking forward to you subscribing to our YouTube channels. My name is Rochelle Carrier, and I'm a DEI consultant and authoress of Emotional Intelligence, a toolkit for managing diversity, equity, and inclusion. The link to purchase the ebook will be in the comments. For a living, I help organizations implement DEI plans and reframe their cultural mindsets through thought-provoking web shops and workshops, signature talks, and webinars. Join us as we continue to share the different voices in the DEI space. I am so excited to introduce a trailblazer. Julie Turney is a heart-centric and people-focused HR professional with over 16 years of experience in the field. She is the brainchild of HR at Heart Consulting, Inc., a coaching firm she describes as the HR safe space. Julie created her firm as part of her healing process through her second bout of HR burnout to help HR professionals struggling to connect theory to practice and deal with the emotional weariness of working in the profession. Julie is also the lead organizer of Disrupt HR Caribbean for Barbados, Jamaica, and Trinidad. Also, the host of HR Sound Off podcast show. And she is also the author of the book Confessions of an HR Pro, Stories of Defeat and Triumph. Julie is on a mission to raise awareness around mental health in HR and demystify the many misconceptions in the profession as she connects the HR community. We are here today with Julie. Welcome, Julie. We have read your bio and we want to allow you the occasion to welcome yourself in your distinctive way. We want to get to know you and to connect with you genuinely.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Rachel. I really appreciate it. Hi to everyone who is here today. It's such a pleasure to be here and share space with you guys. I am a mom and a wife, first and foremost, daughter, sister, and all those other things. But I have three beautiful children, two boys, one girl, and they are my heart, my pride, and my joy. And I got into this space as a way for me to kind of not just be a safe space for HR professionals, but also as part of my journey of creating legacy for my children, that they could see the importance of not just working in companies for the sake of working, but also that they could see the importance of building their own story, their own journeys, wherever it takes them, that anything is possible. And that's kind of how I crafted this journey and created HR Heart Consulting. I worked in HR, core HR, for 16 years. And during those 16 years, I saw a lot of tears from my children. I saw a lot of frustration from my children in terms of just, mommy, you work too hard. Mommy, you work too long. Why are you so sad? because it's so hard not to bring home a lot of the burdens and struggles that you face in the profession. And then you don't realize the trauma that it causes your family until they say something. And my children were very vocal about that as they started to get older and recognize the stress that I felt from being in my role. And I loved what I did, but because I was so empathetic, and I'm a huge empath, my children felt it. And I just felt to myself like there has to be a better way for me to find quality time where it's okay for me to take my kids to school, where it's okay for me to pick them up from school, where it's okay for me to, just sit with them for a little bit if they're afraid, if they're ill, that it's okay for me to stay at home with them. And it's okay for me to strike that balance. And I didn't feel that for such a long time. And then I burned out twice. And the second time, almost fatally so. And if it wasn't for, having those moments where I was able to stop in my tracks and figure out, look, this is not sustainable. And your family and your friends who really love you have been telling you this for a long time. There has to be a better way. And in finding that journey of healing for myself, I found HR at Heart, or it found me. And that's where I am today, advocating for HR professionals and just providing them a safe space because we need it. Opportunities to heal, thrive, learn, grow, and just feel safe about the information that we want to share, about the frustrations and the hurt and the angers and the uncertainty that we feel as HR professionals that we don't show to our leadership because they expect us to be happy, bouncy, jovial supporters, or our employers, or our colleagues because we're so prideful. So that is where I am today.
Oh, that's beautiful. I think also, and I don't mean that lightly when I say it's beautiful, I think also it's important to be aware of where you're at during those moments so that you can understand where you can go.
Yeah.
And until we have, and I say we because I've had a burnout. I've had
Mm-hmm.
burnouts for 25 years, and I
Mm-hmm.
didn't know they were actual burnouts. I thought it was part of the process to be tired all the time.
Yeah.
And
Mm.
it's the past one I had was before I started, all my different ventures, and
Yeah.
it was when I realized, like you, that I need to drop off my daughter in a happy mood. I need to pick her up and be in a happy mood. I need to be more engaged with her.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the one and only time that we get to spend with our children is now, because
Yeah.
as they get older, they're going to be off on their own.
Mm-hmm.
And like you, I don't want to be the parent looking back and saying, what have I done? Why could I have not spent more time with them?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
It's such a critical time in their lives. I mean, my children are teenagers heading into their 20s, and I have one in his 20s. This part of life is the most challenging part for them, and I want to be there for every part of it. And yes, I have regrets about what I missed when they were younger, but I'm here now, and I'm going to show up now the best way that I can.
Right. Let's dive in.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're working and you're helping HR professionals,
Yes.
but how was it when you were working to ensure employees that remain engaged and productive?
So employee engagement has always been that space that I'm always been truly excited about. When you think about an employee's journey in an organization, there's so many pivotal points that we as HR touch on those moments, from coming in, learning about the organization, to the point where you're in your job, feeling comfortable, learning new things. How do you develop and grow in your role? How do you seize those opportunities for promotion? How do you seize those opportunities to really grow and develop yourself? Always was important to me as an HR professional for others, right? Because that's what we do as HR. We're constantly giving and supporting others. And so I always wanted to make sure that whenever people interacted with me at every stage of their progression in the organization, that they felt like they were seen, that they felt like they were heard, that they felt like I really made an effort to do something about either a pain point that they had or just moving them through a process, making it as seamless as possible. And employee engagement is not an easy thing when you think about all the different dimensions that come with it. Having supportive leaders who really take the time to understand their employees and their personality types, where they will thrive, what you need to do so they can thrive, what you shouldn't do to stop them in their tracks from growing. So these are all things, and science matters to me. And I think employee engagement and science go hand in hand. So for me, learning those things and then putting things in place to help employees grow and thrive and making sure products and services are things that they really needed was truly important to me.
Right. You know, we have, I think it's interesting because you said you were an empath
Mm,
and how much you gave others to allow them to feel engaged and welcome. And that's part of inclusivity.
yep. Oh yes. Understanding the people that you work with is so important. And in every organization that I've ever been in, from I would say maybe for all of my HR career, actually, every organization that I've been in, I've always had people who I worked with from different cultures. I live on the island of Barbados. A lot of the organizations that I've worked with are international businesses, Fortune 500s, startups, Fortune 100s. And there's always been that element of expat, local. And so cultural diversity and helping people to understand cultures has been a huge thing for me in terms of helping people to feel like they belong, right? Because if you can't, how do you help an organization to feel like they belong if they don't understand each other's cultures? So bringing in that element of cultural diversity and educating people on, hi, this is Rachel, and Rachel comes from the US. This is the part of the US that she comes from. This is, how her working style is. These are some of Rachel's favorite dishes. This is what Rachel likes to do. And this is Barbados. And this is who we are as Barbadians and what we love to do. Because a lot of times, you hear people say, well, when in Rome, but still you want the Romans to understand what happens when you're in Italy, right? So it's really important that we create those spaces so that people can feel like they belong. And cultural diversity plays a very big role in that. So I'm glad you raised that.
Right. I think it's more than, I've been in spaces where it was, let's celebrate. I'm going to use this as a very broad, a certain holiday,
Yeah.
whether, Christmas or Hanukkah
Mm-hmm.
or,
Cinco de Mayo.
Cinco de Mayo. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a step, but it's not just enough.
No.
Right? Like you said,
Mm-hmm.
it's where is she from? What does she like to eat? Because that's a big one.
Yes.
Culturally, we all, I mean, you and I probably eat the same foods, but culturally, versus everybody else, our foods
Mm-hmm.
are different.
Uh-huh.
In Italy, it's different. In Greece, it's going to be different.
Mm-hmm.
In Venezuela, it's going to be different. So bringing that up and having those conversations
Mm-hmm.
so that people can have a more diverse understanding,
Yes.
right, of where Rochelle comes from
Mm-hmm.
will definitely help on starting the process of inclusivity.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Definitely. Mm-hmm.
I agree with you. There's a
Yeah.
LinkedIn user here, and she says something here. She says, or he says, it's a LinkedIn user.
Mm-hmm.
I've had burnouts too. It's even more tough when there is no one to turn to, either because they wouldn't understand or because most people don't want to listen to other people's problems.
Mm.
Burnout is isolating and mentally challenging.
Oh man, I feel you there. It's true. And if you're in HR, I think it's important to recognize that it's not just about the burnout. As I said before, I'm an empath, a huge empath. And one of the things that we also feel as HR professionals is compassion fatigue, not to be confused with burnout. They're two completely different things, right? So burnout is that, as you said, an overextension of stress that ultimately leads to this tiredness, frustration, brain fog, all of those things, right, Rochelle? And then in compassion fatigue is now because you're holding so much space and you're taking on so much from people, you are vicariously being affected by their trauma. That's compassion fatigue. It's completely different, especially when you're in moments where employees either don't want to be helped or you're not able to give them the help that they need because the organization, the leadership is pushing back on it. Either way, you're in a defeatist position, right? And so you have a combination of both. It's not just about the burnout. You have both. And in the DEI space, even more so, especially if you're a DEI person who has been hired as a token hire. So like you're hired to be the DEI person on staff, but you can't, your hands are tied and you can't roll out the projects that you wanted to roll out because the organization just wanted to have a DEI person. And that's it.
Right. Right. It's
Mm.
it's challenging. So you're really burning both ends of the candle.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And burnout gives you the physical exhaustion, but compassion fatigue gives you the mental exhaustion.
Right. Right.
Mm-hmm.
There's another person. Thank you so much for chiming in, Nicole Tinson. She said, so many of us really deal with this. I'm happy Julie created this space for professionals and Rochelle for hosting this space. We aren't alone.
Yeah,
Mm,
you're definitely not alone. In the words of Lisa Nichols, Yana, you are not alone.
absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So, how would you attract and retain diverse talent?
So many different ways that we really have to go about it, but starts with intentionality, right? What do we mean when we say we want to attract and retain diverse talent? And I think I remember a long time ago listening to Taryn Ellis, one of my favorite people. And Taryn said, think about when you're in a room, who's missing,
Mm,
right? If you start with who's missing, then you know how to fill the space.
mm,
And then when you get intentional about, okay, now I know who's missing, how do I attract that talent? Means you have to understand that person's needs and that person's culture. And you have to understand their story, right? So the research is important. I think the best recruiters are the recruiters that take the time to understand their clients or their potential clients, not just from the perspective of the job that they're looking for,
right.
but the space that they're looking to be in and how they want to belong in that space and how they want to make a difference in that space. But understanding their story is equally as important. So you're more than that ATS system. You actually see people. And
Right.
so when we're going through that recruitment process, then we bear those things in mind. Is like we almost have a persona for the people that we're looking to recruit. What does that person look like? What is their background? Do they have a family? Do they like dogs? Do they like being outside? Like really get into the nitty gritty of the persona of your potential hire and really getting to understand that person. And I feel it's important to ask those questions in the interview process to understand, get a sense of belonging. Like, what do you like to do in your spare time? Ask the human questions in the interview. What do you like to do in your spare time? What's your favorite dish? Then all those things give you a little bit more to add to that experience of understanding the person you're looking to fill that space with. And then once you bring that person on board, like I said, I think understanding the element of having cultural diversity, a cultural diversity piece in your onboarding is important, and then creating spaces for your people in who are diverse to feel like they belong. So giving them the opportunity to either create communities or clubs within the organization, I think that those things are just as important so that they feel like they belong. And that's how you get people to feel safe, right? You create that psychological safety. But then also that's how you start to build trust and loyalty. And so retaining your diverse talent then becomes a lot easier. But a lot of us want to miss out those human elements. We don't want to take the time to do those little things that actually end up being big things for the organization when you lose those people.
Absolutely. Do you think a great part of it also has to do, you know, we had a show on Tuesday as
Mm-hmm.
well, and we talked about the book Dare to Lead.
Mm.
Yeah, and being vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because I didn't understand, not I don't, but I didn't understand what vulnerability really meant.
Mm.
And I had a negative connotation attached to vulnerability until
Mm.
I did a Tony Robbins seminar for 4 days. And there
Mm-hmm.
was, I was put in a Zoom breakout room.
Mm-hmm.
And in that breakout room, I received a nice little message from one of Tony Robbins' staff that
Mm-hmm.
said, check out this book. And obviously, she was observing me. I didn't realize she was observing me. And every time I went into a Zoom breakout room, I was tight-lipped.
Mm.
And then through my process, I had a clarity coach, I had a business coach. This is after the burnout,
Yeah.
and things were coming to light, and the book was still in the back of my mind, but not in
Yeah.
the forefront of my mind. And then finally, somebody else mentioned this book to me, and then 4 months later, I read it, and I realized
Mm.
that. And it's I'm not saying it's all organizations,
No.
I
No.
it's definitely there. There's less of the heart-centric aspect in a lot of the organizations, and that's what
Yes.
being vulnerable is.
Mm.
Vulnerable is not seen as being weak.
No.
It's being empathetic, it's asking
Empathetic,
the right questions.
compassionate, yes, curious.
That's exactly what it is. So
Yeah.
when you say to ask those questions, it's not that, "Oh, we're running an organization here and this is what you need to do." It's, well, the organization, the big part of your organization are the employees that work for this organization,
Yep. Are human beings.
are
They're not
human
just
beings.
numbers. They're not just
Absolutely.
numbers. They're not cattle in a ranch
Right.
branded. They are people with feelings and emotions and lives and families and stories. And it's important to know those things, right?
Right. It
Absolutely.
absolutely.
Mhm. We are in tune.
We are. We are. I have a
Yes.
great question here from
Mm.
Valerie. She says, in my experience, I've always distrusted HR.
Mm.
How do you suggest people of color approach HR with concerns?
Oh, that's a really good question. I guess, first of all, let me ask you this. Why have you always distrusted HR? What has been your experience with HR? Because understanding that first will then help with how do we move forward with getting you to a space of trust. Trust has to be earned, right? Trust is a very important currency in human life. We we purchase food from restaurants because we've had a good experience and we trust that the food is going to be well cooked and that there's not going to be any hair in it or anything like that. The flavors are going to be on. And we build trust, and that's how franchises start to be created and built. We buy clothes from certain places because we know and trust the brands that we purchase from, right? And HR, just like finance and any other department, you have to feel like trust is very high, but trust is even higher. Mm, so Valerie is saying in her experience, they protect the company first. This is a common, if that's been your experience, perception is a very funny thing, right? Everyone's perception is their reality. And that happens because in your perception there's some measure of truth to it. So if in your experience you've experienced HR who protects the company first and does not advocate for the employees, then I'm sorry. I'm going to apologize for any HR profession you've encountered that that's happened with. But that's not the way HR should work, right? HR is the advocate for everyone, for employees. We are the impact architects. We are the first responders of organizations, which means that we are there to support everyone, whether it's at the leadership level, employees on the ground. It's our responsibility to hold space, share space, protect, create processes and procedures that benefit everyone. An organization cannot exist without employees working. If it could, then there would just be organizations with leaders, and that would be it. But they need people to get things done. And so advocating for your people is important. And I think for HR professionals, I want to be careful how I say this, but it's important to say it, right? I try to keep things as real as I possibly can. Just like any other profession, you're going to have good HR and you're going to have bad HR. And I have said for years that for the people who are in it just for the sake of being able to boss people around and wave their power and wield their power and unfair people and not be heart centric, those, if that's you, if you're all about the paper and you're not about the people, if you're all about the process and you're not about the people, you are not practicing HR correctly. And you even need to figure out how you're going to change that. And if you don't want to change that, then you need to figure out how to make your exit from the profession. Period. That's how I feel about it. Because HR is about building trust. If you cannot trust your HR, who can you trust? And it's unfortunate that there are still HR professionals out there who are like that are creating those spaces. But it's not the majority. If you check this platform, LinkedIn, you will see that there are millions of HR professionals. I think the last time I checked, there was about just over 18 million HR professionals on LinkedIn. Active, not so active, but they're there. And every single time I interact with HR professionals from the space that I come from of coaching, supporting, helping to heal and deal with burnout, I always hear the HR professionals who are like, I do so much for my people. I'm exhausted. The pandemic has me so burned out. And when they realize that it's not just the burnout, but the compassion fatigue, like I have so many HR professionals who have been like, I wish I knew you before I left this profession, but I left because I was burned out. I was exhausted. I was frustrated. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to go. And I had no Julie. Those are the HR professionals that I see, that I hear every single day. And there's thousands of them. And I know I've barely scratched the surface in building my relationships with them. But what I say all of that to say, if you don't feel like you can trust your HR, it's going to be very hard for you to approach. You need to have, you need to build a relationship and have conversations. And I would say watch, observe the people in the HR space to determine whether or not you will build a relationship with them. They're the person that you see when you enter the organization. They're the person that you will touch and see at various points throughout your organization. No matter the services that you're looking to engage in with the organization, your HR people should be there touching on those things. But I always say the best HR professional is the HR professional that gets up from behind their desk and gets to know their people. That is getting up and getting to know their people. if you have an HR professional that's doing that, at least you know they're trying. And that means that it makes it easier for you to approach them. But if you have an HR professional who's stuck behind their desk with their door closed, you don't know an inch, a thing about them, it's going to make it a lot harder. And if the only time you see them or hear them is when they are wielding organizational mandates and policies, then it's going to make it harder for you to build trust. The best HR professionals are the ones that are getting up and getting into the nitty gritty and getting to know their people.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, you dropped a lot of good nuggets. I think also what's really important, like you said, you know, because obviously you've spoken from a position of when the employee has already been hired.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe also, and we had a doctor on our show. This is probably a whole other conversation, but to tie it all in, and she was, because we were talking about mental health among the black and brown community
Mm-hmm.
and how it's a stigma. And she was saying, you know, it's very important to question your therapist, ask
Yeah.
them questions to see if you are aligned. So I
Mm-hmm.
think part of the interview process would be to, like you said, observe. You know,
Yes.
I think definitely body language,
Mm-hmm.
micro expressions,
Mm-hmm.
to see if your own values as an employee or as a human centric person aligns with the values of the company. And
Mm-hmm.
that's where we can see if, you know, if it's going to be a right fit for us.
Us, exactly. I think a lot of times you're so on point there, because I think a lot of times as going through the recruitment process as a candidate,
Right.
we ask certain questions, but when it comes to those DEI questions, we can ask those. Like, we have a right to ask, like, what does your organization look like from a diverse perspective? From a belong, do your employees feel like they belong? You know, you don't. The minute that you hear someone at the table say, "Oh yeah, we're a family," kind of a red flag. Red flag. Oh yeah, we have DEI. We celebrate Cinco de Mayo. Red flag. Because diversity is way more than that. Oh yeah, like we have persons from different genders here and different sexualities here. We support that. How? But they can't tell you how. Red flag, you know. Um and I think it's important to ask those questions, because then you know if they're really taking diversity seriously in the organization, if they're really taking belonging seriously in the organization. You have a right to ask those questions. And I feel like so many of us leave some of those questions on the table when we should be asking them, because we're too busy trying to ask, well, what does a day look like, and what's your leadership style, and what would I be thrown into right now? But how does that work from the perspective of belonging? And will I be expected to work long hours? How do you see people who leave work on time versus not working overtime? Like, how do you see those things? Because part of belonging is work life balance. So people say, I don't really believe in work life balance, but I believe that you should be working. You don't work to live, right? I mean, live to work. You work to live. Reverse. Okay. So asking those questions is really important, but asking those questions about diversity and inclusion, and really ask, you know, what's your black and brown ratio? How many people here are Asian? Ask them those questions. It's not putting them on the spot. If they are leaders who are really about promoting diversity and inclusion in their organization, they should know their numbers. And you have a right to ask, what does your Asian population look like? What
Right.
does your black and brown population look like? What does your Hispanic population look like? What does your disabled community look like? Do I noticed coming into the building, I only saw stairs. So does that mean that you don't give opportunities to people who are in wheelchairs?
Right. Where's the accessibility?
Where's the accessibility? Yeah.
Right.
You know, I'm sitting in this chair that has arms, but I have big hips and I feel a little uncomfortable. That already tells me you're not creating a space for me to belong. Because, it's not just about the race, the gender, but it's about, and I talk a lot about fat shaming because it's so important, not just because I'm fat, but because I think it's important, regardless of whether I was fat or not, people who are fat should feel like they belong to. And if I am creating a space for an interview where I have these chairs that have arms on them that people with bigger hips won't be able to sit in comfortably, I'm already saying this space is only for skinny people. Mm-hmm.
That's a very good point.
These are very important questions that we need to bring up. If you're asking the same la-di-da questions that someone with autism cannot relate to, again, how are you creating a space of belonging for people with neurodiversities? So these are very important questions that you as candidates, as potential candidates, have the right to ask these organizations. If they're putting their numbers out there, you can pull them and take a look at them and say, oh, well, I noticed in the last report that your organization did, your Black and brown hires in leadership was less than it was 2 years ago. What's the reason for that?
Right.
Ask them the questions. Ask them the questions because they need to answer them. That's how you hold them accountable.
I agree. Mm-hmm. Precious, thank you so much. Precious always shows up. I don't think she's ever missed a show. I know.
Hi, Precious.
She's just amazing. So she says, so true, Julie. Great questions, Julie. Can we expect honest answers?
The best you could do is ask.
Right.
The best you can do is ask. But again, as I said, the recruitment process is a two-way street. A lot of times we hire recruiters, and even they themselves, if you have a recruiter that can't answer these questions, you need to start thinking about, do you have the right recruiter working on your behalf, right? And moving your relationship forward. That's a good, important thing. But then do your own research, do your own homework, look and see what those DEI statistics look like for that organization, because they do have that data out there. And you have the right to ask those questions, because that will tell you, is this a space that I really want to go and work in? Will I really belong in this space? What kind of communities and clubs do they have in that space? And then if you could find employees to ask that question, and you can always find them on LinkedIn, because if you Google the company, it will show you the employees. And you could go reach out to someone and just say, hey, I'm kind of thinking about this job, and I realize that you work at this company. And if you don't mind me asking, would you like to can you give me 15 minutes for a virtual coffee just so I could ask you a couple questions? The worst thing they could say is no, or they may not answer at all. But what if they do answer? And what if they're willing to give you that 15 minutes? Doesn't hurt to try.
I agree. That's those are great points, because at the same time, like you said, we ask what's your leadership style?
Mm-hmm.
The very generic questions. Generic questions.
Mm-hmm.
It's leading up to what really the candidate wants to know, but it's that courageous question that's going to bring the truth out. Or if it doesn't come out in words, it'll come out in, like I said, micro expressions.
Yeah.
At a point where you see that they're feeling uncomfortable with the questions. That's already a clear indication that if someone is not able to answer the question, then that's a clear indication for you to either hop.
It's so true.
Right.
I always say to people, like, what are your non-negotiables? Like, if going into a job, what are your non-negotiables? Do you have a checklist of non-negotiables? Now, you might have it mentally, but sometimes you might need to write it down. And I always encourage people, write your list of non-negotiables. And as you go through, it will help you to figure out the questions that you want to ask for when people leave stuff on the table. Because during that interview, you're like, oh, is it okay if I make some notes? Sure. That time you got that list of non-negotiables there. You could tick those, you be ticking those off. You can tick them off mentally. But for if you want to work in a space that is really embodying diversity and inclusion, you should have that checklist for yourself. What are my non-negotiables? And am I willing to ask these questions in order to move myself forward in this interview process? Those are very important questions that you need to answer, but that's a way you can prepare yourself. Have a checklist of your non negotiables. And as you go through the interview process, tick them off.
Absolutely. I
Mm-hmm.
agree. That's a wonderful idea. And Precious thinks the same. She says, courageous questions.
Yes.
A LinkedIn user said that's a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
It's important. So how would you align people strategies to business objectives?
First, you got to look at the business objectives, right? So, understanding where the business is coming from. Know the business of the business, right? How your business makes money, loses money, how your business deals with building its talent pool and retaining its talent pool. And then once you have that information, you go look at your competition. Who's your competition in the same industry? What are they doing better in terms of their talent, keeping their talent? And you can see it. LinkedIn is available for everyone. You can research the companies. They're posting stuff on their pages, on their websites. Like, this is a free for all now in terms of being having access to information and data like we never had before. And then who are the people that you are following? Like I always say, it's important for you to know like what McKinsey's saying, what Gallup is saying, what Forbes is saying, what entrepreneur is saying, and then look at those because that's where organizations are posting stuff about themselves. That's where the top 50 lists for top best organizations live in those Gallup surveys and McKinsey and so on. And look at those, and then you can go look for the HR people because they're listed in those surveys and reports. Develop relationships with those people. Find out like what are they doing from a recruitment perspective. And then once you've got all that information, you can start to create an amazing people strategy that is not only on point for growth, for putting your people strategy, putting your people in a position to win today, but putting your organization in a position to win in the future. Because now you're able to be more futuristic, and look 10 steps ahead. You're able to be more agile and pivot when it comes to creating that people strategy, because you're not just coming from what your organization has and what they're looking to achieve, but you're also able to look at what the competition is doing and how they're looking to achieve it and how their HR people are looking to achieve it. And you've created this community of HR professionals that are willing to share that stuff with you. And then you go create that people strategy and you just shine and slay all day when you do
Right.
that. No man is an island. And so when you're looking to connect your organizational strategy to your people strategy, it's not just about understanding what the organization strategy is. It's about the people who they're competing with, the markets they're competing in, and how you make those changes by understanding how their HR people are working and operating. That's when we got to get rid of ego, right? I always
Right.
say, according to Dr. Rick Risby, I thank him daily for this quote: ego is the anesthesia that deadens the pain of stupidity. We got to get rid of ego, right? Put egos through the door, start building communities, start sharing, building strategies together. Everyone wins. Everyone wins when we do it that way.
It's true.
Makes sense?
It absolutely does. And I think you're dropping some amazing gems. And if you haven't tuned in, please continue to tune in. We're dropping close to the Diversity Connects Us hour. We still have some time left. Thank you for all your comments and your feedbacks. They're so appreciated.
Mhm.
And as we continue, I have another question for you. And how would you develop diverse leaders? What strategies or implementations do you think should be adhered to for leaders, providing they are open?
Yeah. So again, I think that it's important as professionals, building leaders in organizations, that we recognize that it's not just about whether people can do good work or not. And again, as I mentioned before, it's about who's missing. And then I also think after that, it's important to recognize, how do we put something in place that helps us to develop and grow leaders? And how do we do it in a way that people will be receiving, will be receptive? I almost had my dictionary closed off for a minute. That will be receptive to receiving the learning. When you think about creating diversity and creating diversity in leadership, who are the leaders that you already have existing in your organization that are from different diversities? Will they be willing to mentor and coach up and coming people in that space, so that you already have a mentorship circle, leadership circle that's happening from a diversity perspective? And also understanding your personality types, as where I was coming from before when I talk about the science of things, because science matters. And I know a lot of people shy away from psychometrics, but I think it's important to find out from, based on those reports that come out of the assessments that people do, what people's work style is. There's a company that I work with. I'm not plugging them, but they're very good, but I'm not plugging them, called Savile Assessments. And Savile Assessments is based out of the UK. And they have an assessment that I love to share with my clients, which is called Leadership Risk and Leadership Impact. And what it determines is, what is your risk to recruit, to promoting someone to a leadership position who is not ready? What is the risk to the business? And what is the impact to the team that they are going to lead? Because a lot of times we don't think about those things. But if you put people in leadership positions before they're ready, and they don't know how to keep a team motivated, they don't know how to share directives and different things like that, they're going to demotivate the team. Now, if the team was on a high because they had a great leader before, all of that diminishes, which means your return on investment for your team is now going to cost you more money, because people either get frustrated and they leave. You have to go through the recruitment process then again to bring them in. So I think it's important to understand how you connect the science as well, and understand the leadership risk, leadership impact. But I also think it's important for you, as you build diverse leaders, that you use the leaders you already have and allow them to coach and mentor aspiring upcoming leaders. And again, conversations with people about developing and growing themselves in the organization and where people see themselves in leadership roles. Because a lot of times we have those conversations, but then people get missed over because we do silly things like we only promote based on tenure. But you got people who are maybe younger in roles, younger in the organization, who may be ready to move up before someone with tenure who might be just happy where they are. And it's about having those conversations, honest conversations with people to move things forward. But mentorships and coaching is key. I think this is the era of building coaches and building mentors, and stop building managers. We don't just want people who are going to, mass produce stuff, and they're not ready for it. We need to start building coaches, and we need to start building managers, and putting people in spaces to mentor and support aspiring leaders.
I agree. It's interesting,
Mm-hmm.
to tie in with what you're saying. We have a LinkedIn user who said emotional intelligence is
Yes,
important for good leadership.
absolutely. And
And
and those reports, that report from that leadership risk, leadership impact study that is done by Saville, points out a lot of those things. Does your leader have the emotional intelligence to support a team? And not just emotional intelligence, but emotional fortitude. Because then it comes back to that space of, are they willing to be vulnerable as leaders to support and mentor the people who are coming up?
right. And this is exactly what we were talking about.
Mhm.
Are they reflecting on, on their biases. There's a lot of layers involved in this. Julie, are they addressing their own biases, conscious, implicit, or explicit?
Mm-hmm.
Where, what space or what emotional space are they in to be able to address certain situations that arise in the workplace? Because if you're coming
Yes.
from a space of anger, then that's the emotional output you're going to put out. If you're
Yeah.
dealing from a space from sadness or grief or any, these are all emotions. So if
Mm-hmm.
those emotions are not checked in a spot or
Mm-hmm.
dealt with, then it's very hard to be able to attract those leaders and be a good leader or a manager
Exactly.
or a CEO.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And you just made me think of something just passed through my brain. But I was thinking in terms of like, as you're building those leaders, it's important to ask certain questions, in terms of if you're building a team as a leader, what does your team look like from a diverse perspective? Getting them to answer those questions, because do we, as we do those internal interviews to promote to those roles, those questions are important. If you have someone on your team um, who is of color, showing up late all the time, what is your instant thought about that person?
I agree.
Yeah. If you're recruiting for a position, and this person comes from a particular state or they come from a particular area in the community, what is your instant thought about recruiting that person? Even though they have the competencies and skills that are necessary, but they come from a particular area, would you recruit them?
Right. So basically, and we talk about this in my workshop and webinars, what story
Yes.
are you attaching to? What story are you holding to? Or what story have you created
Mm-hmm.
in your mind that's going to prevent you from hiring that person?
Yep. Who is the best candidate, right?
Right.
It's like the FBI does that all the time, right? The FBI and the CIA and those organizations, when they put these people through these tests, and you have different people in the simulations, an innocent child, but the child has a gun, you
Right.
know those kind of situations. Like, how do you determine who's the right person that's the best fit for your team or your organization? These are the kind of scenarios that we should be putting at our leaders to see how they're really thinking and feeling, and do they have their DEI nerve, their DEI muscle switched on? Because we have to be able to work with our leaders to help them switch that muscle on and work it. And that only happens if we put them in situations and give them scenarios to help them improve that.
Right. How do you think we should power up the partnership between DEI and HR? Because before,
Mm-hmm.
I'd say DEI probably always existed. And I think now it's more in the forefront since the murder of George Floyd.
Yeah.
And there's been a racial reckoning and awakening. So,
Mm-hmm.
how HR, it was a silo before.
Yeah.
And now, we want to create these power partnerships. How would we go about doing that?
Conversations.
Mm,
Conversations are important. I still see a lot of, okay, so first let me come from a Caribbean context. So in a Caribbean context, I actually had a meeting last week with a group of Caribbean HR professionals, and I asked them, where DEI is concerned in your organization, do you have a separate standalone DEI person working in your organization, or are you as HR taking on the role of DEI? And the majority of them were like, well, we actually are taking on the role of DEI for those of us that are doing it. And others were like, well, we don't have a DEI person, and as an HR person, I'm not doing it either. I think it's really important that people understand the importance of DEI in their organizations. And I'm speaking to the Caribbean people who may come across this interview at some point, to say diversity and inclusion matters in the Caribbean just as much as it matters anywhere else in the world. And when we talk about diversity and inclusion, we're talking about culture, we're talking about body types, we're talking about brains, we're talking about disabilities. There's so many other areas. It's not just about race, it's not just about sex, it's not just about gender equality. All of those things matter, but diversity is an umbrella of a lot of a bigger story, of a bigger framework. And so even if you're in the Caribbean or a country where your color is the majority, it still matters. And so you need to think about the importance of separating that role, because one standalone HR person focusing on DEI is a recipe for disaster. For those people who are in organizations where they have a DEI person, you are allies with HR, and HR is allies with you. And so you need to find ways to create opportunities for people to learn and grow together where they see that solidarity within HR and DEI. If you're seen as a standalone divided, then the organization will not put any importance to DEI if they're not seeing you guys working together in synergies. But when they see you together and they see you in the fight together and they see you going through this together, then they recognize, we need to pay attention. If you're in those DEI roles where you feel that you're just a token hire and you're not able to do your job, then you need to be honest with yourself and think about, is this the place I really want to be and that I need to move on? But dialogue, allyship is important. Every role in the organization matters, but when HR and DEI are together, they are stronger together. So we
Absolutely.
need to work on that.
Oh, that's amazing. Oh, you've just dropped a diamond.
It came out of the rough, which was what I said before.
Exactly. Hence why it's a diamond. This has been wonderful. As we reach the top of the Diversity Connects Us hour, you would definitely benefit from Julie Turney's LinkedIn page. She's heart centric. She helps the burnout professionals. She can be a wealth of information. She's the brainchild of HR at Heart Consulting Inc. I'm sorry, and a coaching firm that she describes as the HR safe space. Julie created her firm as part of her healing process through her second bout of HR burnout to help HR professionals struggling to connect theory to practice and deal with the emotional weariness of working the profession. Thank you all so much for all the information that you shared. It was a great pleasure to have you. This podcast highlights lived experience and inspirational stories of strength and tenacity. We will share profound and courageous dialogues that influence DEI by breaking the barriers and labels of stereotypes, confronting biases, and offering best practices to achieve a more cultural mindset. Stay tuned. Next week, we do have a surprise. Julie, it's been wonderful.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much, Rochelle. I appreciate the time and the invitation. Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you, everyone.
it was wonderful. Thank you.